The sound of rattling chains against the wooden floorboards of the wagon sent Olivia Reeves's heart racing as the first light of dawn crept across the dusty Wyoming horizon. She had been held captive for 3 days now, her wrists raw from the iron shackles, her spirit nearly broken, but not quite. The year was 1878, and in this unforgiving territory, a woman alone had few allies. Yet as the wagon hit a rough patch of terrain, Olivia knew this might be her only chance at freedom. Gavin Blackwell, the man who had abducted her from her family's ranch outside Twin Falls, Wyoming, was distracted by a heated argument with his accomplice riding alongside them. They were fighting over their plans for her ransom, or worse. The wagon maintained a steady pace as it traversed the rolling plains, the horses trotting at a clip that would make any leap dangerous, possibly fatal. But death seemed preferable to whatever fate awaited her. Drawing a deep breath, Olivia maneuvered herself toward the edge of the wagon, careful not to make a sound. Her heart pounded so loudly she feared it might alert her captors. With her hands still bound, she glanced at the rough terrain below rocks, sagebrush, and hard-packed earth. It would hurt, it might kill her, but she had to try. With one last silent prayer, Olivia threw herself from the moving wagon. The world spun around her as she braced for impact, but instead of the hard ground, she felt strong arms catch her mid-fall. The momentum sent both her and her unexpected savior tumbling, but his body cushioned her from the worst of it. When the dust settled, Olivia found herself staring into the most startling blue eyes she had ever seen, set in a face weathered by sun and hardship, yet undeniably handsome. "Are you trying to get yourself killed, madam?" the stranger asked, his voice a low rumble that somehow calmed her racing heart despite the dire circumstances. "I was trying to escape," Olivia managed, her voice hoarse from days of little water. "Those men—" "I know what kind of men those are," he said grimly, looking toward the wagon that continued to roll away, its occupants still unaware of her escape. "Name's Hayes Keller, and we need to move before they realize you're gone." Hayes helped Olivia to her feet, his calloused hands gentle as he examined her shackled wrists. "We'll need to get these off you, but not here. My horse is hidden in those trees. Can you walk?" Olivia nodded, though her legs trembled beneath her dusty skirts. "I'll manage, Mr. Keller, and thank you." "Save your thanks until you're truly free, Miss Reeves, Olivia Reeves." Hayes nodded once, his expression unreadable as he guided her toward a small copse of trees where a magnificent palomino stood waiting. As they moved, Olivia cast a fearful glance over her shoulder, expecting to see the wagon turning around, expecting gunfire or shouts. But the distance between them and her captors grew, and for the first time in days, Olivia felt the faintest flicker of hope. The palomino nickered softly as they approached. "This is Sundance," Hayes said, patting the horse's muscular neck. "Best friend a man could ask for out here." He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a canteen. "Drink, but slowly. You look like you haven't had water in days." Olivia accepted the canteen with shaking hands, taking small sips of the lukewarm water that tasted sweeter than anything she could remember. 3 days, she confirmed. "They took me from my father's ranch near Twin Falls. They killed our ranch hand who tried to stop them." Tears threatened, but Olivia blinked them back. This was no time for weakness. Hayes's jaw tightened at her words. "Blackwell's gang. They've been terrorizing ranchers all across the territory." He took back the canteen and secured it to his saddle. "We need to move. They'll be coming back for you once they realize you're gone." As if on cue, a distant shout carried on the wind. Olivia's blood ran cold as she saw the wagon had stopped, and 2 riders were turning back, scanning the ground. Hayes moved with efficient speed, lifting Olivia onto his horse before mounting behind her. "Hold tight," he instructed, his arms securing her as he urged Sundance into motion. The horse responded immediately, breaking into a gallop that carried them away from the pursuing men. The prairie stretched before them, offering little cover as Hayes pushed his horse hard. Olivia clung to the saddle horn, the wind whipping her tangled hair around her face. Despite the danger, she felt a surge of exhilaration at her escape, temporary as it might be. "There's a canyon up ahead," Hayes called over the thundering hoofbeats. "If we can reach it, we'll have a better chance of losing them." Olivia nodded, not trusting her voice. She could hear the pounding of hooves behind them growing closer. Hayes leaned forward, urging Sundance to an even faster pace. The canyon appeared on the horizon, a jagged tear in the earth that promised both danger and sanctuary. Hayes guided his horse toward a narrow trail that descended into its depths, a path that would be treacherous for riders unfamiliar with the terrain. "Hang on!" he shouted as Sundance began the steep descent. Olivia gripped tighter, pressing her body back against Hayes's solid chest. The trail twisted sharply, forcing the horse to slow. Behind them, gunshots rang out, bullets kicking up dust near Sundance's hooves. Hayes muttered a curse, pulling his revolver from its holster. "Take the reins," he ordered, and Olivia complied, her hands still shackled but functional enough to guide the horse. Hayes twisted in the saddle, taking aim at their pursuers, and fired 3 rapid shots. One of the men cried out, clutching his shoulder but remaining mounted. The second rider pulled back, unwilling to risk the dangerous descent at speed while under fire. "That'll buy us some time," Hayes said, holstering his weapon and taking back the reins. "But they'll find another way down. We need to find shelter." They continued deeper into the canyon, the high walls offering protection from further gunfire. The path eventually widened into a dry creek bed, and Hayes directed Sundance along it, the horse's hooves crunching on the smooth stones. "There's an old trapper's cabin not far from here," Hayes explained as they rode. "It's well hidden. We can rest there and figure out how to get those chains off you." Olivia nodded gratefully. The adrenaline of escape was wearing off, leaving her exhausted and painfully aware of her injuries. "How did you happen to be there?" she asked. "When I jumped?" Hayes was silent for a moment, his expression guarded. "I've been tracking Blackwell's gang for 2 weeks. They took something from me, too." "What did they take?" His grip on the reins tightened. "My brother. He's just a kid, 17. Got caught in the crossfire when they raided our homestead. They left him for dead, but he survived. Barely. I left him in the care of a doctor in Laramie and set out after them." Olivia's heart ached for this stranger who had risked his life to save her. "I'm so sorry about your brother. And now I've delayed your pursuit." Hayes shook his head. "You haven't delayed anything. Finding you might be the key to finding them. And I couldn't very well leave a lady to her fate." They rode in silence for a while, the canyon walls towering above them, streaked with layers of red and ochre that glowed in the midday sun. Despite her circumstances, Olivia couldn't help but notice the rugged beauty of this place. "There," Hayes finally said, pointing to a nearly invisible path that branched off from the creek bed. "The cabin's up there." The trail wound through a stand of scrubby juniper trees before revealing a small log cabin nestled against the canyon wall. It was weathered, but solid, its existence known only to those who needed to disappear. Hayes dismounted first, then helped Olivia down. Her legs buckled slightly, and he caught her elbow to steady her. The brief contact sent an unexpected warmth through her, despite her dire situation. "Thank you," she murmured, embarrassed by her weakness. "You've been through hell, Miss Reeves. No need to apologize for being human." His voice was gruff but kind as he led her to the cabin door. "Wait here while I check inside." Hayes drew his revolver again and cautiously entered the cabin. Moments later, he returned. "All clear. It's not much, but it'll keep us hidden while we rest and plan our next move." The interior of the cabin was Spartan, a rough wooden table with 2 chairs, a stone fireplace, and a narrow cot against one wall. Dust covered every surface, but it was dry and secure, a far cry from the back of Blackwell's wagon. "Sit," Hayes instructed, gesturing to one of the chairs. "Let me see about those shackles." Olivia complied, extending her raw wrists. Hayes examined the iron bands with a frown. "I've got some tools in my saddlebag. I'll be right back." While he went to retrieve his tools, Olivia took stock of her situation. She was free from her captors but still in danger. This man, this cowboy, had saved her life, but she knew nothing about him beyond his name and his quest for vengeance. Yet something in his eyes told her she could trust him, at least for now. Hayes returned with a leather pouch containing an assortment of tools. "This might hurt," he warned as he selected a thin metal pick, "but I'll be as gentle as I can." His large hands were surprisingly dexterous as he worked on the locks of her shackles. His face was a study in concentration, brow furrowed, jaw set. Olivia found herself studying the lines of his face, the way the light from the cabin's single window highlighted his strong features. "How did you learn to pick locks, Mr. Keller?" she asked, partly from curiosity and partly to distract herself from the pain, as he manipulated the iron bands around her wrists. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Hayes, please. And let's just say I had a misspent youth before I settled into ranching. Some skills never leave you." The first shackle opened with a click, and Olivia gasped with relief as it fell away. Hayes gently cradled her wrist, examining the raw, bleeding skin beneath. "We need to clean these wounds," he said, his voice tight with controlled anger at what had been done to her. He worked in silence on the second shackle, his concentration intense. When it finally gave way, he set aside the tools and reached again for his canteen. "This will sting," he warned, before pouring a small amount of water over her wrists to clean away the dirt and dried blood. Olivia bit her lip to keep from crying out, but couldn't suppress a small whimper of pain. Hayes's eyes met hers, filled with compassion. "You're doing fine," he assured her. "I've got some salve in my kit that will help." As he tended to her wounds, applying a pungent herbal salve and wrapping her wrists with strips of clean cloth torn from a spare shirt, Olivia found herself telling him about the attack on her father's ranch. Her father, Samuel Reeves, had built their ranch from nothing after moving west following the war. Their ranch hand, Old Jim, had been like family. His death at Blackwell's hands still felt unreal. "They came at dawn," she explained, her voice hollow with the memory. 3 men. They shot Jim when he tried to stop them. My father was in town delivering cattle to the railroad. They said they'd kill him too unless I came quietly." She paused, swallowing hard. "I thought if I went with them, at least my father would be spared." Hayes finished bandaging her second wrist, his touch lingering for just a moment. "That was brave of you," he said quietly, "but foolish. Men like Blackwell don't keep their word." "I know that now," she admitted, "but I didn't see any other choice at the time." He nodded, understanding in his eyes. "We should rest while we can. They'll be searching, but they won't find this place easily. Tomorrow we'll figure out how to get you home." "No," Olivia said firmly. "I can't go home yet. Not while those men are still out there. They'll just come back for me, or hurt my father." She met Hayes's surprised gaze steadily. "I'm going with you to find your brother and stop Blackwell's gang." Hayes started to protest, but something in her expression stopped him. "It's too dangerous, Miss Reeves." "Olivia," she corrected, "and danger already found me, Mr. Keller. I'd rather face it on my terms than live in fear of it finding me again." A long moment passed between them, something unspoken but powerful in the air. Finally, Hayes nodded. "Get some rest," he said, gesturing to the cot. "I'll keep watch." Despite her determination, exhaustion claimed Olivia quickly. She lay down on the narrow cot, expecting sleep to elude her after all she'd been through. Instead, she drifted off almost immediately, comforted by the knowledge that Hayes Keller was standing guard. She woke to the smell of coffee and the soft sound of movement. Opening her eyes, Olivia saw Hayes crouched by a small fire in the fireplace, a dented coffee pot nestled in the coals. Daylight filtered through the cabin's single window, indicating she had slept through the night. "Morning," Hayes said, noticing she was awake. "Found some old coffee in the supplies here. It's not great, but it's hot." Olivia sat up, wincing at her stiff muscles and various bruises from her captivity and escape. "Thank you," she said, accepting the tin cup he offered. The coffee was indeed terrible, bitter, and weak, but the warmth was welcome. "I scouted the area at first light," Hayes informed her. "No sign of Blackwell's men, but that doesn't mean they've given up. They'll be watching the trails out of the canyon." "What's our plan?" Olivia asked, taking another sip of the awful coffee. Hayes studied her for a moment, as if still debating whether to include her in his pursuit. Blackwell's gang has a hideout in the mountains east of here. That's likely where they've taken their other captives, including the banker's daughter from Sweetwater. There are others? Olivia's stomach clenched at the thought. Hayes nodded grimly. Blackwell's been taking hostages for ransom from all over the territory. Some have been returned after the money was paid. Others. He didn't finish the sentence, but he didn't need to. Olivia understood the implication. "How do you know where their hideout is?" she asked. "I didn't until yesterday. One of the men with Blackwell when you escaped, I recognized him. Joe Garrett. He used to work for the railroad before turning outlaw. I know him because he worked with my father years ago." Hayes's expression darkened. Garrett would know these canyons, and there's an abandoned mining camp in the eastern range that would make a perfect hideout. Olivia set down her empty cup. "Then that's where we need to go." "It won't be easy," Hayes warned. "It's at least a day's ride, and we'll have to avoid their scouts." "I'm not afraid," Olivia said, though it wasn't entirely true. She was afraid, but her determination outweighed her fear. "Do you have a gun I could use?" Hayes raised an eyebrow. "Can you shoot?" "My father made sure I could handle a rifle, said a woman alone on the frontier needed to protect herself." A sad smile touched her lips. "I never thought he'd be right so soon." Hayes considered this, then nodded. "I have a spare revolver. It's not the same as a rifle, but the principle is similar." He reached for his saddlebag and removed a Colt Navy revolver, checking that it was loaded before handing it to her, grip first. Just in case. The weight of the weapon was unfamiliar but reassuring in Olivia's hand. She checked it as her father had taught her, verifying the load and cylinder rotation before carefully tucking it into the pocket of her skirt. "We should get moving," Hayes said, gathering their meager supplies. "If we ride hard, we can reach the foothills by nightfall." As they prepared to leave, Hayes handed Olivia a worn but clean flannel shirt and a battered hat. "These were in the cabin stores. They'll help protect you from the sun, and the shirt's better than that torn blouse." Olivia accepted the items gratefully. Her once fine blouse had been ripped during her captivity, leaving her feeling exposed. She turned her back to change, aware of Hayes's deliberate movement toward the door to give her privacy. The flannel shirt was much too large, but it was clean and whole. She rolled up the sleeves and tied the excess at her waist. The hat would keep the sun off her face, though she suspected she already had a fair burn from her days in the open wagon. When she emerged from the cabin, Hayes was already mounted on Sundance, holding the reins ready. He offered her a hand up, and once again, Olivia found herself seated in front of him on the horse, his solid presence at her back, both comforting and disquieting in a way she couldn't quite define. They set off cautiously, taking a different trail out of the canyon than the one they had used to enter. Hayes explained that this path was steeper, but less likely to be watched. The ascent was grueling, forcing them to dismount and lead Sundance through the narrowest passages. By the time they reached the rim of the canyon, the sun was high overhead, beating down mercilessly. The landscape that stretched before them was vast and unforgiving, rolling hills giving way to distant mountains, with little cover between. Hayes scanned the horizon, his expression intent. "We'll follow the ridgeline as long as we can," he decided. "It offers some cover and a vantage point if anyone's following." Olivia nodded, squinting against the bright sunlight. Despite the danger of their situation, she found herself appreciating the wild beauty of this land, a beauty she had taken for granted growing up on her father's ranch. They rode in companionable silence for a time, both lost in their thoughts. Eventually, Olivia's curiosity got the better of her. "Tell me about your ranch, Hayes, and your family." Hayes was quiet for so long that Olivia thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft with memory. "It's not much. A small spread west of Laramie. My father started it after the war, like yours. He died 2 years ago, heart gave out while mending fences." He paused. "It's just been me and my brother Liam since then. We were making it work, even starting to prosper a bit. Then Blackwell's gang came through." "I'm sorry about your father," Olivia said softly. "And Liam, you said he was hurt?" Hayes nodded, his body tensing slightly behind her. Shot twice. Doctor says he'll live, but he might not walk right again. His voice hardened. That's why I have to find Blackwell, not just for revenge, but to make sure he can't hurt anyone else's family. My father will be looking for me, Olivia said after a moment. Probably raised a posse as soon as he got back to find Jim dead and me gone. That could work in our favor, Hayes acknowledged. The more pressure on Blackwell's gang, the more likely they are to make mistakes. They continued riding through the afternoon, stopping briefly to rest Sundance and share a meal of jerky and hardtack from Hayes's provisions. As they ate, Hayes taught Olivia more about the revolver he had given her, how to aim, how to account for the kick, how to reload quickly. Hopefully you won't need to use it, he said as she practiced drawing and aiming at an imaginary target. But if you do, remember, breathe out as you squeeze the trigger. Don't pull. Olivia nodded, absorbing his instructions carefully. There was something reassuring about his patient teaching, the way he spoke to her as a capable equal rather than a helpless woman. As the day waned, the distant mountains drew closer, their slopes darkening with shadow. Hayes led them toward a cluster of rocks and stunted trees that would provide cover for the night. Once there, he helped Olivia dismount, his hands lingering briefly at her waist before he stepped back. "We'll camp here," he said, his voice gruffer than usual. "Best not to risk a fire. The nights get cold up here, but the light might be seen for miles." They made a cold camp, with Hayes fashioning a small shelter using his oilskin coat and some branches. He insisted Olivia take the improvised tent while he kept watch, and though she protested, she was grateful for the protection from the night air that was rapidly cooling as darkness fell. Wrapped in the blanket Hayes had provided, Olivia found herself studying him as he sat with his back against a boulder, his profile outlined against the darkening sky. There was something about him that drew her beyond the fact that he had saved her life, a steadiness, a quiet strength that made her feel safe despite the danger they faced. "Get some sleep," Hayes said, sensing her gaze. "Tomorrow will be a hard ride." Olivia obediently closed her eyes, but sleep was elusive. Her mind kept returning to the moment she had jumped from the wagon, the terrifying sensation of falling, and then the unexpected security of Hayes's arms catching her. It had been only yesterday, yet it felt like a lifetime ago. She must have eventually drifted off, because the next thing she knew, Hayes was gently shaking her awake. The sky was still dark, but there was a hint of lightness on the eastern horizon. "We need to move," he said quietly. "I heard riders in the night. They passed a mile or so south of us, but they're definitely searching the area." Fully alert now, Olivia quickly gathered her few belongings and helped Hayes break camp, erasing all signs of their presence. Within minutes, they were mounted and moving again, heading east toward the mountains that loomed larger with each passing hour. The sun was fully up when they reached the first foothills, revealing a landscape more varied than the plains they had crossed. Pine trees clustered in the ravines, offering welcome shade, while rocky outcroppings provided natural lookout points. Hayes led them on a winding path that followed game trails and dry creek beds, always alert for signs of pursuit or danger ahead. By mid-morning, they had climbed high enough to have a commanding view of the terrain they had crossed. "Look," Hayes said, pointing back the way they had come. In the distance, a plume of dust marked the passage of riders, at least 3, maybe more. "Blackwell's men. They're tracking us." Olivia felt a chill despite the warmth of the day. "How did they find our trail?" "They know these mountains," Hayes said grimly, "and they're determined to find you. A ransom hostage is valuable." "What do we do?" Olivia asked, fighting to keep her voice steady. Hayes studied the distant riders, his expression calculating. "We keep going. The mining camp isn't far now, maybe 4 hours' ride. If we're lucky, we can reach it before they catch up to us." He glanced at her. "Are you ready for this? Once we get close to their hideout, there's no turning back." Olivia squared her shoulders. "I'm ready. Those men killed Jim and would have killed my father. I won't let them hurt anyone else if I can help it." A hint of a smile touched Hayes's lips, the first real smile she had seen from him. "You're something else, Olivia Reeves." The compliment warmed her more than it should have, given their precarious situation. They continued their ascent into the mountains, the trail growing steeper and more treacherous. Twice they had to dismount and lead Sundance through particularly difficult passages, the loyal horse picking his way carefully over loose rock and around fallen timber. By early afternoon, they had reached a high ridge that offered a view of the next valley. Hayes signaled for a halt, dismounting and helping Olivia down. Together, they crept to the edge of the ridge, keeping low to avoid being silhouetted against the sky. Below them, nestled in a protected hollow, was the abandoned mining camp. It was larger than Olivia had expected. A dozen or so weathered buildings clustered around what must once have been a productive mine entrance. Smoke rose from the chimney of the largest structure, and several horses were tethered outside a ramshackle stable. "That's it," Hayes whispered. "Blackwell's hideout." Olivia's heart raced as she studied the camp. "Do you see any guards?" Hayes pointed to a figure seated on a chair outside one of the smaller buildings. "There. And probably another at the far end of the camp." He scanned the area carefully. "I count 7 horses, so at least that many men, plus any inside we can't see." "And hostages?" Olivia asked, her throat tight. "If they're here, they'll be in one of the more secure buildings. Probably that one." He indicated a structure with boarded windows near the center of the camp. Used to be the assay office, sturdy walls, small windows. They retreated from the ridge to discuss their plan, leading Sundance deeper into the trees where they wouldn't be spotted. "We need to wait for nightfall," Hayes decided. "Less chance of being seen. In the meantime, we should try to circle around and approach from the north. There's more cover that way." Olivia nodded, though the thought of waiting for hours with their pursuers closing in behind them made her stomach knot with anxiety. "What about the men tracking us?" "With luck, they'll assume we continued east toward Laramie. But we need to be prepared for them to find our trail." Hayes checked his revolver and the rifle he carried in his saddle scabbard. "If it comes to a fight, you stay hidden. Promise me that." Olivia wanted to argue, to insist she could help, but the determined look in Hayes's eyes stopped her. "I promise," she said reluctantly, "unless you're in danger. Then all bets are off." Hayes looked like he wanted to argue further, but instead he nodded, a reluctant respect in his eyes. "Fair enough. Let's move." They spent the next few hours making a wide circle around the mining camp, moving from cover to cover, always alert for signs of Blackwell's men. The terrain was challenging, forcing them to dismount frequently, but they made steady progress. By late afternoon, they had reached a position north of the camp, concealed in a dense stand of pine trees that offered a different perspective on the hideout. From this vantage point, they could see more activity men moving between buildings, carrying supplies, or simply lounging in the late afternoon sun. One man in particular caught Hayes' attention, a tall figure giving orders to the others, his manner authoritative. "Blackwell," Hayes murmured, his voice tight with controlled rage. "The tall one with the black hat." Olivia studied the outlaw leader. From this distance he looked unremarkable, just a man, not the monster she had built up in her mind. Yet this ordinary-looking person had ordered Jim's death, had planned to ransom or worse, and had shot Hayes' brother, leaving him possibly crippled for life. "I see movement in the assay office," she whispered, pointing to a shadowy figure visible through a gap in the boarded windows. "Someone inside." Hayes nodded. "Hostages, most likely. We need to get closer once it's dark." They settled in to wait for nightfall, sharing the last of their provisions and watching as the activity in the camp changed with the approaching evening. A fire was lit outside the main building, and the men gathered around it, passing a bottle between them. The guard outside the assay office was relieved by another man, who looked less attentive than his predecessor, already sipping from a flask as he took his position. As darkness fell, Hayes outlined his plan. "I'll approach from this side, using the old mine buildings for cover. If I can take out the guard quietly, I can free the hostages. Once they're safe, I'll deal with Blackwell." "And what do I do?" Olivia asked, already knowing she wouldn't like the answer. "You stay with Sundance, hidden in these trees. If something goes wrong, if you hear gunfire, or if I'm not back by midnight, you ride for Laramie. Find the sheriff. Tell him everything." Olivia frowned. "I'm not leaving you behind." "This isn't a discussion, Olivia." Hayes's voice was firm. "I've been tracking these men for weeks. I know what I'm doing. Having you there would just give me one more person to worry about." She wanted to argue, but she knew he was right. Her presence would be a distraction at best, a liability at worst. Still, the thought of him facing those odds alone made her chest ache with worry. "Fine," she conceded, "but if you're not back by midnight, I'm coming after you before I go for help." Hayes looked like he wanted to object, but instead he sighed. "You're the most stubborn woman I've ever met, you know that?" Despite everything, Olivia found herself smiling. "So I've been told," repeatedly. A moment of understanding passed between them, something deeper than the circumstances of their brief acquaintance should allow. Hayes reached out, his fingers gently brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Be careful," he said softly. "You too," she whispered, her heart suddenly racing for reasons that had nothing to do with danger. Hayes checked his weapons one last time, then melted into the darkness, moving silently toward the camp. Olivia watched until she could no longer see him, then settled in to wait, the revolver he had given her clutched in her hand. The minutes crawled by with excruciating slowness. Olivia strained to see any movement in the camp, but from her position, she could only make out the flickering of the fire and occasional shadows passing in front of it. The moon had risen, providing some illumination, but not enough to follow Hayes's progress. An hour passed, then another. Olivia found herself holding her breath at every sound, the hoot of an owl, the rustle of wind through the pines, the occasional burst of laughter from the outlaws around their fire. Sundance stood patiently nearby, occasionally snorting softly as if sensing her anxiety. Just as Olivia was considering moving closer to get a better view, a commotion erupted in the camp. Shouts, followed by the unmistakable sound of gunfire. Hard in her throat, she strained to see what was happening. Figures were running between buildings, some taking cover, others seemingly searching for the source of the disturbance. More gunfire, this time from the direction of the assay office. Olivia's resolve broke. She couldn't stay hidden while Hayes might be in danger. Leading Sundance deeper into the trees where he would be safe, she secured him to a pine trunk, then moved carefully toward the edge of the camp, staying low and using the shadows for cover. As she drew closer, the chaos in the camp became clearer. Several figures were crouched behind barrels and crates, firing toward the assay office. Return fire came from inside the building. Hayes must have made it inside and was now defending the hostages. But he was pinned down, outnumbered and outgunned. Olivia needed to do something to help, to create a diversion that would give Hayes a chance. Her eyes fell on the stable at the far end of the camp, currently unguarded as all attention was focused on the assay office. Moving carefully from shadow to shadow, Olivia made her way to the back of the stable. Inside, several horses shifted nervously at the sound of gunfire. She slipped through the rear door, finding 5 horses in the stalls. Working quickly, she opened each stall, then struck a match and set fire to a pile of hay in the corner, making sure it was positioned to spread quickly, but give the horses time to escape. As the flames caught and began to spread, Olivia slapped the nearest horse on its flank, sending it bolting out the front of the stable. The other horses followed, panicked by the fire and smoke. Shouts of alarm rose from the outlaws as they saw their mounts escaping and the stable beginning to burn. The diversion worked exactly as Olivia had hoped. Several men broke off their attack on the assay office to chase after the horses or attempt to control the fire. In the confusion, Olivia saw the door of the assay office open and several figures emerge, Hayes leading what appeared to be 2 women and a man, all moving in a crouch toward the cover of the old mine entrance. Olivia started to make her way toward them, keeping to the shadows, when a hand suddenly clamped over her mouth from behind. She was yanked backward against a solid chest, a voice hissing in her ear. "Thought you could escape me, did you?" The voice was familiar Gavin Blackwell himself. "You've caused me a lot of trouble, Miss Reeves." Olivia struggled against his grip, but he was too strong. She felt the cold press of a gun barrel against her temple. "Stop fighting, or I'll kill you right here," Blackwell threatened. "You're worth more alive, but I'm losing patience." He began dragging her backward, away from the chaos of the camp. Olivia's mind raced, searching for a way out. Her right hand was pinned against her side, but her left was free. Slowly, carefully, she reached for the pocket of her skirt where Hayes's revolver was hidden. Blackwell was focused on watching the ongoing gun battle, using it as cover for his escape with his recaptured prize. He didn't notice Olivia's movement until her fingers closed around the grip of the revolver. By then, it was too late. Olivia pulled the gun free and fired blindly backward. The shot went wide. But the sound and the muzzle flash startled Blackwell enough that his grip loosened. Olivia tore free, spinning to face him, the revolver now held in both hands as Hayes had taught her. Blackwell recovered quickly, raising his own gun. "You little—" Olivia didn't let him finish. Remembering Hayes's instruction, she breathed out slowly and squeezed the trigger. The revolver bucked in her hands, the report deafening in the night air. Blackwell staggered, a look of surprise crossing his face as crimson bloomed on his chest. He fired as he fell, his shot going wild, and then collapsed to the ground. For a moment, Olivia stood frozen, the smoking gun still raised. She had never killed before, had never thought herself capable of it, yet she felt no remorse, only a cold certainty that she had done what was necessary. A shout from behind her broke her trance. Turning, she saw Hayes running toward her, concern etched on his face. Behind him, the freed hostages were being led to safety by what appeared to be a young ranch hand, another prisoner who had been helping Hayes from inside. "Olivia!" Hayes called, reaching her side and taking in the scene with a glance. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head, still numb. "He was going to take me again. I shot him." Hayes' eyes moved to Blackwell's still form, then back to her face. Without a word, he pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly as the reality of what had happened began to sink in. "It's over," he murmured against her hair. "You're safe now. We all are." The sound of approaching horses broke the moment. Hayes tensed, pushing Olivia behind him protectively. But the riders who came into view were not outlaws. At their head was an older man whose features were so similar to Olivia's that there could be no doubt of his identity. "Papa!" Olivia cried, breaking free of Hayes's protective stance and running toward her father as he dismounted. Samuel Reeves caught his daughter in a fierce embrace, tears streaming down his weathered face. "My girl," he choked out, "I thought I'd lost you." The posse that had accompanied Samuel, a mix of ranch hands, townsmen from Twin Falls, and what appeared to be a U.S. Marshal, spread out to secure the camp and round up the surviving members of Blackwell's gang. In the chaos, no one seemed to notice Hayes standing alone, watching the reunion with a complex mix of emotions on his face. No one except Olivia. Breaking gently from her father's embrace, she turned and extended her hand toward Hayes. "Papa, this is Hayes Keller. He saved my life." Samuel Reeves looked at the young cowboy with new interest, taking in his steady gaze and the way his daughter's eyes lingered on him. "Then I owe you a debt I can never repay, Mr. Keller." Hayes shook the offered hand, his expression solemn. "No debt, sir. Your daughter saved herself and me more than once." Pride shone in Samuel's eyes as he looked at Olivia. "That sounds like my girl. Stubborn as her mother was, God rest her soul." The marshal approached then, introducing himself as Marshal James Cooper. "I've been after Blackwell's gang for months," he explained. "When Mr. Reeves here raised the alarm about his daughter's abduction, we combined forces." He looked at Hayes with newfound respect. "Seems you did our job for us, son." Hayes shook his head. "Not alone. Those hostages would still be captives if not for Miss Reeves." The marshal's eyebrows rose at this, but he simply nodded. "Well, I'll need statements from both of you, but that can wait until we get everyone safely to town." As the freed hostages were tended to and the captured outlaws secured, Olivia found herself once again at Hayes's side. In the aftermath of violence, with the stable still smoldering and the night air acrid with gun smoke, It seemed strange to feel such a profound sense of peace in his presence. "What happens now?" she asked softly. Hayes looked toward the eastern horizon, where the first hint of dawn was lightening the sky. "I need to return to Laramie, check on Liam, let him know that Blackwell won't hurt anyone else." "And after that?" Olivia couldn't keep the hope from her voice. Hayes turned to her then, his expression open in a way it hadn't been before. "That depends," he said carefully, "on whether there might be a reason for me to visit Twin Falls in the near future." Olivia smiled, her heart lighter than it had been in days despite all they had endured. "I think you'll find Twin Falls has much to recommend it, Mr. Keller, including a certain rancher's daughter who would very much like to see you again." The hint of a smile that had teased her earlier now bloomed fully on Hayes's face, transforming his features and making him look younger, less burdened. "In that case, Miss Reeves, I believe I'll be heading to Twin Falls as soon as my brother is well enough to travel." As the sun rose over the mountains, casting golden light over the scene of their victory, Olivia felt something new dawning within her as well, a future she hadn't imagined just days ago, but one that now seemed as bright and promising as the morning sky. 2 months later, the Reeves Ranch outside Twin Falls was hosting its first social gathering since Olivia's ordeal. The barn had been cleared for dancing, lanterns hung from the rafters casting a warm glow over the assembled guests' neighbors, townsfolk, and friends who had come to celebrate both the harvest and the recent good fortune of the Reeves family. Olivia stood at the edge of the makeshift dance floor, watching as couples twirled to the lively fiddle music. She wore a new dress for the occasion, a deep blue that brought out the color in her eyes, her hair arranged in soft curls around her shoulders. Her father had insisted on the party, saying they had much to be thankful for, and it was time to look toward the future rather than dwelling on the past. And there was indeed much to be thankful for. The reward for Blackwell's capture had been substantial, allowing Samuel to make improvements to the ranch that had been long deferred. More importantly, the nightmare of Olivia's abduction was fading, replaced by a newfound confidence in her own strength and resilience. Yet, as she scanned the gathering, Olivia couldn't help the small pang of disappointment. It had been weeks since she had received a letter from Hayes, informing her that Liam was recovering well and that they hoped to make the journey to Twin Falls soon. But no specific date had been mentioned, and as the days passed with no word, Olivia had begun to wonder if perhaps the connection she had felt with the quiet cowboy had been one-sided or simply born of the extraordinary circumstances they had shared. "You look too serious for a celebration, daughter," Samuel said, appearing at her side with 2 glasses of punch. He handed one to Olivia, his eyes kind as he studied her face. "Thinking about your cowboy?" Olivia blushed, taking a sip of punch to hide her reaction. "He's hardly my cowboy, Papa," Samuel chuckled, not fooled for a moment. "I saw the way you two looked at each other. And I haven't seen you check the road this often since you were a child, waiting for me to return from cattle drives." Before Olivia could formulate a response, a stir at the barn entrance caught her attention. Her heart leapt as she recognized the tall figure standing in the doorway, hat in hand, looking somewhat uncomfortable in what were clearly his best clothes. Hayes. And beside him, leaning on a cane but standing tall, was a younger man who could only be his brother Liam. Samuel followed her gaze and smiled knowingly. "I may have sent a telegram inviting them specifically to tonight's gathering," he admitted. "Go on then." Olivia handed her punch glass back to her father and made her way across the barn, weaving between dancers and guests, her eyes never leaving Hayes. He spotted her as she approached, his face lighting up in a way that erased any doubt she might have harbored about his feelings. "Miss Reeves," he said formally as she reached him, though his eyes conveyed a much more intimate greeting. "Mr. Keller," she replied, matching his tone but unable to contain her smile. "You're late." "Apologies, madam. The journey took longer than expected with Liam still healing." Hayes gestured to his brother, who was watching their exchange with undisguised interest. "May I present my brother, Liam Keller?" The young man extended his hand, his grip firm despite his obvious physical challenges. "Miss Reeves, My brother has talked of little else but you for weeks. I had to see for myself if you lived up to his descriptions." His eyes twinkled with mischief. "I must say he didn't exaggerate." Olivia laughed, instantly liking the younger Keller. "I'm delighted to meet you, Liam, and even more delighted that you've both come." She turned back to Hayes. "Will you be staying long?" A shadow of uncertainty crossed Hayes's face. "That depends," he said carefully, "on whether certain opportunities I've been considering work out." Before Olivia could ask what opportunities he meant, her father joined them, greeting Hayes warmly and introducing himself to Liam. As the men exchanged pleasantries, the fiddle players struck up a waltz, couples forming around them on the dance floor. Hayes turned to Olivia, extending his hand. "Would you do me the honor, Miss Reeves?" Her heart fluttering, Olivia placed her hand in his. "I would be delighted, Mr. Keller." As Hayes led her onto the dance floor, his hand warm and secure at her waist, Olivia felt as though they were the only two people in the room. The events that had brought them together had been harrowing, but she couldn't find it in herself to regret any of it if this was the result. "You look beautiful," Hayes said softly as they began to move with the music. "I've thought about you every day since I left Twin Falls." "As I've thought of you," Olivia admitted, her customary forthrightness winning out over maidenly reserve. "Your letters were too few and far between, Hayes Keller." A hint of color touched Hayes's cheeks. "I've never been good with words on paper, and I was busy with arrangements." "Arrangements?" Olivia asked, curiosity piqued. Hayes guided her through a turn before answering. "I've sold our ranch near Laramie, used part of the reward money from Blackwell's capture to buy a smaller spread." He hesitated, then added, "It's about 5 miles east of Twin Falls." Olivia nearly missed a step, her heart suddenly racing. "You're moving to Twin Falls? Permanently?" "If that meets with your approval," Hayes said, a rare vulnerability in his expression. "Liam and I both agreed we were ready for a fresh start, and I found I had a powerful reason to want to be near Twin Falls." "And what reason might that be, Mr. Keller?" Olivia asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Hayes stopped dancing, holding her gaze with an intensity that made the rest of the room fade away. "You know the reason, Olivia. From the moment you jumped from that wagon and I caught you, something changed for me. Something I can't explain and don't want to fight." Olivia's breath caught in her throat. "I feel it too," she admitted, as though fate brought us together in the most unlikely way. Around them, other couples continued to dance, the music swelling, but Hayes and Olivia remained still, lost in their own world. Slowly, respectfully, Hayes raised a hand to her cheek, his touch feather light. "I'm not a man of many words," he said softly, "but I need to say this clearly. I love you, Olivia Reeves. I think I have since that first day, and I know I will for all the days to come. If you'll have me, I want to build a life with you, a home, a family, a future." Tears welled in Olivia's eyes, but they were tears of joy, not sorrow. "Yes," she whispered, her heart so full she could hardly speak. "Yes to all of it, Hayes Keller. I love you too." In the middle of the dance floor, surrounded by friends and neighbors, Hayes Keller bent his head and kissed Olivia Reeves for the first time, a gentle, reverent kiss that held the promise of a lifetime. As they parted, both a little breathless, the sound of applause broke through their private moment. They turned to find the entire gathering watching them, smiles on every face. Samuel Reeves was at the forefront, his expression a mixture of joy and the bittersweet awareness of a father who knows his daughter has found her own path. "Well," Hayes said, his voice rough with emotion, "I suppose that makes it official." Olivia laughed, her happiness too great to contain. "Indeed it does, Mr. Keller. Indeed it does." Spring came early to Wyoming territory the following year. The harsh winter giving way to green grass and wildflowers almost overnight. On the Reeves Ranch, preparations were underway for a celebration that had been months in the planning, the wedding of Olivia Reeves and Hayes Keller. The ceremony itself would be simple, held in the small white church in Twin Falls, but the reception afterward would bring together two ranching families and the entire community that had supported them through hardship and joy alike. In her bedroom at the ranch house, Olivia stood before the mirror, hardly recognizing the woman who looked back at her. Her wedding dress, ordered all the way from Denver, was elegant without being ostentatious ivory satin with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs. Her mother's cameo hung at her throat, a connection to the past as she stepped into her future. A knock at the door preceded her father's entrance. Samuel paused in the doorway, his eyes misting as he beheld his daughter. "You look just like your mother on our wedding day," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "She would be so proud of you, Olivia." Olivia crossed the room to embrace him, careful not to wrinkle her dress. "I wish she could be here," she whispered. "She is, in her way," Samuel assured her, touching the cameo at her throat. "And she would approve of Hayes. He's a good man." "The best," Olivia agreed, stepping back to check her appearance once more. "Is everything ready?" Samuel nodded. "The buggy's waiting, and if the groom paces any more in front of the church, he's liable to wear a hole in the floorboards." He offered his arm. "Shall we, daughter? Your future awaits." The journey to the church passed in a blur of anticipation. Twin Falls had turned out in its Sunday best, the streets lined with well-wishers as the Reeves buggy made its way through town. By the time they reached the church, Olivia's nerves had given way to a serene certainty that this day marked the beginning of everything she had ever wanted. Inside, the church was filled with flowers and familiar faces. Liam Keller stood at the front beside his brother. His recovery nearly complete, he still walked with a slight limp, but he had abandoned the cane months ago. Hayes himself looked transformed in his new suit, his hair neatly trimmed, his face freshly shaved. But it was the look in his eyes as Olivia walked down the aisle on her father's arm that took her breath away, a look of such complete adoration and wonder that she felt tears threatening her composure. The ceremony itself was brief but heartfelt. They exchanged vows they had written themselves, promises of love, support, and partnership that acknowledged both the conventional expectations of marriage and their own unique journey. When Hayes slipped the simple gold band onto Olivia's finger, his hands were steady, his voice unwavering as he pledged himself to her for all time. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the pastor declared, beaming at the couple. "You may kiss your bride, Mr. Keller." Hayes didn't hesitate, gathering Olivia into his arms and kissing her with a tenderness that belied the strength in his embrace. The church erupted in cheers and applause, but for Olivia and Hayes, there was only each other, the beginning of their shared life stretching before them like the endless Wyoming sky. The celebration afterward was everything a frontier wedding should be: abundant food, lively music, and enough goodwill to sustain a marriage through whatever challenges might lie ahead. Hayes and Olivia moved among their guests hand in hand, accepting congratulations and well wishes, their happiness so evident that it seemed to infect everyone around them. As the afternoon waned into evening, Hayes led his bride away from the festivities for a moment of privacy on the church porch. The spring air was sweet with the scent of new growth, the setting sun painting the landscape in hues of gold and rose. "Happy, Mrs. Keller?" Hayes asked, his arms encircling her waist. Olivia leaned back against his chest, savoring the solidity of him, the reality of this man who was now her husband. "Completely," she assured him. "And you? Any regrets about catching a woman who jumped from a moving wagon?" Hayes laughed, the sound rumbling pleasantly against her back. "Only that I didn't find you sooner," he said, pressing a kiss to her temple. "But we have the rest of our lives to make up for lost time." "The rest of our lives," Olivia echoed, turning in his arms to face him. "I like the sound of that, Hayes Keller." His kiss was a promise, as binding as the vows they had exchanged. Whatever the future held, they would face it together, the cowboy and the woman brave enough to leap into the unknown, and fortunate enough to be caught by the one person who would always be there to break her fall. 5 years later, the Keller Ranch east of Twin Falls had flourished into one of the most prosperous in the region. What had begun as a modest spread had expanded as Hayes applied modern ranching methods and a tireless work ethic to the operation. The original cabin had been replaced by a comfortable two-story house, surrounded by outbuildings and corrals that housed one of the finest herds of cattle in Wyoming territory. But the true measure of their success wasn't in acres or livestock, but in the life Hayes and Olivia had built together. Their home rang with the laughter of their 3 children, 4-year-old Samuel, named for his grandfather, 2-year-old Emma, who had her mother's spirit and determination, and baby James, just 6 months old, already showing signs of his father's quiet strength. On this particular summer evening, Olivia stood on the front porch, watching as Hayes returned from the pasture, their eldest son perched proudly in front of him on the saddle. Samuel's face was alight with joy at this special time with his father, his small hands clutching the saddle horn just as Hayes had taught him. Inside, Emma was helping, or more accurately, hindering Liam as he prepared dinner. Hayes's brother had built a small cabin on the property, but took most of his meals with the family. Over the years, Liam had become not just a partner in the ranch, but an integral part of their family, a beloved uncle to the children and a steadfast friend to Olivia. As Hayes dismounted and lifted Samuel down, the boy ran toward the house, eager to tell his mother about his adventures. Olivia knelt to receive him, listening with exaggerated interest to his tale of helping to check the fence line and spotting a family of rabbits in the tall grass. Hayes approached more slowly, removing his hat as he climbed the porch steps. Though the years of hard work had added a few lines to his face and perhaps a touch of silver at his temples, to Olivia he was more handsome than ever, the man who had caught her when she fell, in every sense of the phrase. "Dinner almost ready?" he asked, placing a kiss on Olivia's cheek before ruffling Samuel's hair. "Liam's finishing up now," Olivia confirmed. "Emma is helping him, so we may be in for some interesting flavors tonight." Hayes laughed, the sound still warming Olivia's heart after all these years. "As long as it's not as bad as your first attempt at sourdough bread. I think I broke a tooth on that." "Hayes Keller, you promised never to mention that again," Olivia protested, though she was smiling. Her initial forays into frontier cooking had been somewhat disastrous, but she had persevered, eventually becoming known for her skills in the kitchen. Samuel tugged at his father's hand. "Papa, can we go fishing tomorrow? You promised." "So I did, partner," Hayes confirmed, bright and early before the chores. Satisfied, Samuel ran inside, shouting to his uncle about the fishing expedition. Olivia and Hayes were left alone on the porch, the lengthening shadows of evening stretching across the yard. "I got a letter from your father today," Hayes said, taking Olivia's hand. "He's planning to visit next month. Says he misses his grandchildren." Olivia smiled at the news. Samuel Reeves had finally handed over the day-to-day operation of his ranch to a capable foreman, allowing him more time to visit his growing family. "The children will be thrilled. Emma has been asking about Grandpa constantly." Hayes nodded, but there was something in his expression that told Olivia he had more to say. She waited, knowing her husband well enough to give him time to find the words. "There was something else in your father's letter," Hayes finally continued. "He's been corresponding with the governor. Apparently there's talk of establishing a new territorial judgeship in this region. Your father put my name forward as a candidate." Olivia's eyes widened in surprise. "Hayes, that's an honor. What do you think about it?" Hayes looked out over the ranch, his expression thoughtful. "I never saw myself as anything but a rancher. But these past years, helping to build this community, serving on the town council, I've come to see that there are different ways to make a difference." He turned back to her. "What do you think? It would mean more time away from the ranch, more responsibility." "I think you would be an excellent judge," Olivia said honestly. "You have a strong sense of justice, and people respect you. As for the ranch, Liam has proven he can manage things when you're away." She squeezed his hand. "Whatever you decide, I support you completely." Hayes drew her into his arms, his expression tender. "How did I get so lucky, Olivia Keller? Every day I thank God for whatever impulse made you jump from that wagon and put me in the right place to catch you." "I think it was more than luck," Olivia murmured against his chest. "I think it was destiny." The peaceful moment was interrupted by a crash from inside the house, followed by Emma's distinctive wail and Liam's voice attempting to soothe her. Hayes and Olivia exchanged a look of amused resignation before heading inside to manage whatever crisis had erupted in their absence. Later that night, with the children asleep and the house quiet, Olivia lay in Hayes's arms, reflecting on the journey that had brought them to this point. From the terror of her abduction to the joy of their wedding day, from the birth of their children to the building of their home and community, every step had led them here, to this life they had created together. "What are you thinking about?" Hayes asked, his voice soft in the darkness. "About how far we've come," Olivia answered truthfully. "About how that moment of desperation when I jumped from the wagon led to everything good in my life." Hayes tightened his embrace, pressing a kiss to her hair. "For me too," he admitted. "I was so lost after Liam was shot, consumed with thoughts of revenge. Finding you, saving you, it saved me too, in a way I didn't even know I needed." Olivia turned in his arms to face him, tracing the contours of his beloved face with her fingertips. "So will you do it? Accept the judgeship if it's offered?" Hayes was quiet for a moment, considering. "Yes," he finally said. "I think I will. It feels like the right next step. A chance to ensure that justice is served for everyone in this territory, not just those with money or power." "Judge Hayes Keller," Olivia mused, a smile in her voice. "It has a nice ring to it." "As long as I'm still just Hayes to you," he replied, capturing her hand and pressing a kiss to her palm. "Husband, father, rancher, and the man who will always be there to catch you if you fall." "Always," Olivia agreed, nestling closer to him. "Though these days my feet are planted firmly on the ground, right where I belong." As they drifted toward sleep in each other's arms, Olivia Keller reflected that sometimes the most desperate leaps of faith led to the most perfect landings. Her jump from that wagon had been an act of courage, born of desperation, but it had delivered her directly into the arms of her destiny, a destiny that continued to unfold in ways more beautiful than she could have ever imagined. And in the quiet Wyoming night, surrounded by the family they had created and the love they had nurtured, both Hayes and Olivia knew that some falls weren't falls at all, but rather the first steps of a journey into a future brighter than either could have dreamed alone.